In this demo, we're going to see how to use the Virtual Machine Role Authoring tool to create a resource definition for a Windows Server 2012 VM role. Now, this demo presupposes that you're familiar with concepts like resource definitions, view definitions, and resource extensions. So we're not going to go into depth on the details of any of those items. We're simply going to learn how to use the authoring tool to easily generate those types of artifacts. So to start, I'm going to click File and choose New Resource Definition Package. I have to give it a name and a location in which I want to generate the package along with any associated artifacts. The tool goes ahead and pre-populates a number of items for me, including the name that I gave, a default version, and a publisher. I'm going to leave the name and the version the same, and I'm going to go ahead and change the publisher. Looking at the parameters section, we can see that the authoring tool has generated a number of default parameters for me, and parameters are used to gain end-user input during the deployment process for things like the VM size, the VHD they'd like to use, and the initial administrator credential. Moving on to the Scale Out tab, what I see is the initial, maximum, and minimum instance counts, along with the upgrade domain count, are hard-coded in this particular VM role gallery item. I'm going to leave the maximum, minimum, and upgrade domain counts hard-coded inside the item, but I'm going to allow the end user to choose how many instances they'd like to deploy at initial deployment time. And the tool makes this really easy for me to do by giving me a Generate New Parameter option. You can see the parameters are in the format of bracket, param, dot, and then an internal name for the parameter, and an ending bracket. And we'll see how to use the view definition later to provide a friendly value or a friendly description of this particular parameter to the end user at deployment time. Moving on to the hardware profile, I could either specify an exact VM size that I want users to use, or I can leave the default authoring tool choice of parameterizing the VM size and thus asking the end user at deployment time to give me the VM size that they would like to create when deploying this particular item. The storage profile is all about which virtual hard disks are going to be used by the gallery item. And again, I can leave the default of a parameter here to ask the end user to choose from a set of VHDs to which they have access to. And I could also add one or more data disks. And again, I could either hard code the value of the data disk image. In this case, I would use the family and release values on that VHD in my VMM system. So if I had a data disk in my VMM library with a family name of 20 gig data disk and a release of 1.0.0.0, I could simply put that in here, and then the end user won't be prompted to choose a data disk. They're going to get a data disk that has this family name and release combination. I could also ask them to provide a LUN. I could hard code a LUN by simply putting an integer in here, or I could have the tool generate a new parameter for me and ask the user to specify the LUN at deployment time. In this demo, I'm not going to go ahead and use a data disk, so I'll delete that. Now you can see we have 8 parameters here, and the reason we have 8 now is because I decided to parameterize the initial instance count. So the tool automatically updates the parameters and tries to choose a sensible type for each of the parameters that I add based on where within the model I've added that particular parameter. We're going to move on to the network profile. The network profile contains one or more network adapters. The tool gives me a default network adapter of NIC1 and chooses some sensible defaults. I can come in here and I could change these for enabling IPv6 or specifying load balancer configurations, but I'm going to leave all the defaults that the tool's given me, including the default to parameterize the network reference. What this means is at deployment time, the end user is going to be asked to select which network they want to use for this particular VM role based on the networks to which they have access. The operating system profile allows me to engage in operating system customization, and our choices here are Windows, Linux, which we'll cover in a later demo, or none, saying that this particular item doesn't require any operating system customization. I'm going to leave the default of Windows, and I'm also going to specify that I want this particular VM role gallery item to be a domain joined gallery item. The tool tells me that for join domain gallery items, the domain to join and the credentials used to join the machine to the domain cannot be left empty. Instead of hard-coding these, I'm going to have the tool generate new parameters for me for each of these fields. And you can see that our parameters section has again been updated, and the domain join credential parameter has been given a type of credential, and the domain to join credential has been given a type of string. Moving back to the operating system profile, everything looks pretty good to me here, so we're going to move on and figure out how best to display this item to end users in the Windows Azure Pack portal. And that's where our view definition comes in. Similar to parameters, localized values have a particular format in the model, and that format is curly bracket, a friendly internal name, and curly bracket. And if we look in our resources file where we define the actual values of these particular localized placeholders for end users to see, the tool automatically generates a US English resource file for me. And you'll see that I have two labels of interest here. I have the actual label of the gallery item, and the internal name for this is Windows Server 2012 label, and a description that I'll display to the end user when they select this particular gallery item in the Windows Azure Pack portal, and that has an internal name of Windows Server 2012 description. If I go to my resources file, you'll see that I have Windows Server 2012 label. The tool's generated a default value for me, but I want the end user to have a little bit of a better experience here. So I'm going to put some spaces in the label. And for the description, I'm going to provide them a more informative description of what this gallery item actually does. We'll come back and modify some other values later on, but right now I want to go back to the view definition itself. The tool is going to ask you to provide icons for your gallery item. If for whatever reason you don't provide icons, the Windows Azure Pack portal will display a default icon. I happen to have pre-staged some icons for use in this demo, so I'm going to go ahead and add them. And because these icons are displayed in various portions of the Windows Azure Pack portal, the tool is going to ask you for three different sizes, a 30 by 30, a 60 by 60, and a 120 by 120. I'm going to go ahead and browse to where I've pre-staged my icons, choose my 30 by 30, choose my 60 by 60, and choose my 120 by 120. And the tool will do some validation around the sizes here. For each of the icons, I click Update, and essentially this means that I'm going to include these icons in my package. I'm going to leave the default language code of US English, and we're going to go on to sections. When a user deploys a particular gallery item, each section defined in the view definition is a page in the deployment wizard. So the tool has gone ahead and given me a default section along with a default category. Now, categories within section simply allow me to group different selections of properties in that particular section page. We have one default category here, but I want to separate out the virtual machine properties, such as the size, the OS image, and the administrator credential, from the domain join properties. So I simply click Section, click Add. The tool is context sensitive, so it knows that because I've selected Section, the only valid thing to add here is a view definition category. So I'll add a new category. The tool has automatically generated a localization parameter for the category name, but because I want to know what this category name actually means when I'm filling out values for it in the resources file, I'm going to give it a name of domain category name. And from here I can go ahead and add parameters to this category. So I'm going to select the domain to join parameter, click the plus sign, and the domain join credentials parameter, and likewise click the plus sign. And if I go back to my VM category, my default category, you can see that those parameters, domain to join and domain join credential, have been removed from this particular category because now they're present in the domain category. So starting off with the VM category, you'll see for any parameter, I can look at the details of that parameter. I can choose the label, description, and if the parameter is required, what message should be displayed to the end user if they haven't provided a value for that. And I can also specify default values here. I'm going to leave the defaults for the VM role size. And for the OS virtual hard disk image, I can constrain the images that will show up at deployment time for this particular gallery item by adding image tags. Now these tags will have to also be present on any VHDs in my VMM library that I want to be available for use with this particular gallery item. I'm going to add an image tag of Windows Server 2012, and the tool comes with a set of default image tags. And if I don't see one that I like in here, I can freeform type my own, but I'm going to choose Windows Server 2012 in this case, and click the plus sign. And now you can see that I have an image tag of Windows Server 2012. Moving on to the admin credential, I'm going to leave all the defaults. And for the VM role time zone, same thing, defaults. And the computer name pattern, I'm going to change the default pattern here to WinServer ###. And the end user can still override this because I've left the configurable property as yes. And I'm going to say that this is required. The user must provide a computer name pattern for me. Network reference and VM role instance count. So VM role instance count, I'm going to suggest a default value of 1 to the end user, but I will say that they can override this and give me a default value of 2 or 3. I'm going to say that it's required, and I'm also going to say that the minimum accepted value here is 1, and because I have a hard-coded maximum instance count of 5, I don't want them to ever specify that they should deploy, say, 6 instances at deployment time. So going back to that parameter, I'm going to say the maximum allowed value here is 5. At any time in the tool when I'm authoring an artifact, I can click the Validate button, and the button will tell me if there are any errors or warnings. Moving on to my domain category name section, I have 2 parameters here that I added earlier, a VM role domain to join, along with the domain join credentials. I'm not going to specify any default values here. I am going to say that these are required, and I can give some sensible minimum and maximum length requirements if I wanted to here. I'm just going to leave those at the default. And for the domain to join credentials, or domain join credentials, I'm also going to leave the default value blank and specify that it's required and configurable by the end user. Now moving back to the resources section, if I needed to add different language codes here, I can simply select from a list, and the tool will go ahead and automatically add a new resources file for me. I'm going to leave that alone for now and simply stick with US English. So now I want to give some additional end user displayed values here for my localized labels and descriptions and required messages and so forth. So we've already modified the gallery item label and description. For the categories, I'm going to say that my first category is virtual machine properties. And for that domain join one that I specified earlier, that category I'm going to say is called domain join properties. For the domain to join, I'll give a friendly label to the end user along with a description. And I'll show you where the descriptions show up in the Windows Azure Pack portal in just a few moments. Similarly for credentials, I'll type in a friendly label for the end user to see. I'm going to use this also for the description, as well as the is required message. And for this one, I'll say must be specified in the event that the end user tries to move along in the deployment wizard and hasn't given a value for the domain to join. So everything looks pretty good here. I'm going to validate one more time, and I'm going to click Save. Now if I switch over to this actual folder in which the tool has generated my artifact, what you'll see is I have the ResDef package. So this is the resource definition package. And the tool also generates and maintains a working directory that has all of the raw artifacts that are within that package. So I could inspect these things if I wanted to, if I thought that there was an error, or I just wanted to see the format of the model and the format of the artifacts that are within the package. One other thing that I want to look at in the tool before we move on to importing this gallery item and showing you the deployment experience is that the tool provides a JSON view to show the actual JSON being outputted in the artifacts within the package. So if I clicked on my view definition, I can see the full JSON view for that view def. And similarly, for the resource definition, I can see the full JSON for the resource definition. And you can see that we pretty format this so it's pretty readable. I'm going to save one more time, and when I go to remove this item, the tool will tell me one more time, give me another warning, do I want to save this resource definition package? I've saved it a couple times, but I'm going to go ahead and save it again. And the next thing we're going to cover is importing this gallery item and making it available to users within the Windows Azure Pack portal. So I'm in my Windows Azure Pack portal server as a service administrator, and I'm on the VM Clouds section of the interface. Within the VM Clouds section, I can not only see the clouds that I've exposed to the Windows Azure Pack portal, but I also have a gallery tab. And the gallery tab is what lets me go ahead and import and manage gallery items that will be available to end users. So I've selected gallery, and I'm going to choose the import button at the bottom, and I'll browse to the location in which I've saved my resource definition package, and I'll click the checkbox. You can see that the gallery item is being imported, and you'll remember that we gave it a name of Windows Server 2012. It's been successfully imported. And on the second page here, I can see that we have Windows Server 2012 with the correct publisher and that it's currently private. I'm going to make the gallery item public so that end users can access it. And by clicking the arrow, I can then assign this gallery item to one or more plans. I'll go ahead and assign it to my demo plan. Click check, and you'll see that it's being added to the plan, and it says it might take some time for the plans to which this item has been added to appear. I generally find that it's pretty quick, so if I switch over to the tenant view of the Windows Azure Pack portal, I'll log in with a demo user that I pre-created that has access to that demo plan. And once the user logs in, you can see that this user hasn't created anything yet, and the portal says, hey, it looks like you're new, create something to get started. I'm going to choose New Virtual Machine Role from Gallery. And because this is the only gallery item present for this particular plan, it's the only choice that I have. You can see that our domain, or our description, shows up here nicely, along with our label and our other label, and the icons. And you can see here that this is the 30 by 30 icon, and this is the 60 by 60 icon. My publisher shows up, the version, and the date in which I publish this within the portal. Clicking Next, I'm asked to provide a name for the virtual machine role itself. I'm going to give it a name of Demo Role. The portal validates that that name is not in use. I click Next, and this is our category, or our section, that we saw in the VM Role authoring tool. You can see that because we parameterize lots of these things, the user has some choices here. The first choice is what size is the virtual machine role that they want to use. I'm going to choose small. There's only one disk that has that matching image tag in a VMM library share that's exposed to this particular cloud. So I'll leave that choice. The administrator credential is going to be the initial administrator of the Windows machine. I'll leave the time zone choice at Pacific. You see that our default value for the computer name pattern is here, but as an end user, I can come in here and change this. I have access to two different networks within this plan, and I'll leave this as, actually I'll change this to Corp. Remember, we parameterized initial instance count. This is where you'll get the description. I'll leave that at 1. And I will leave the domain to join blank for now. And you'll see that because it's required, I get that custom message that I specified earlier in the authoring tool that says domain to join must be specified. So I'll come back here and give it a domain to join, along with some credentials. And by clicking here, the deployment will commence. I'm not going to go ahead and go through the deployment in this particular demo, as this demo is just to show you how to author this item and get it into the Windows Azure Pack and expose to your end users that are subscribed to particular plans. And that will conclude this demo. Thank you very much.